Hello there, dear friends, and welcome once again to the Relaxed Fantasy Review. On this channel, we spend our time looking at fantasy of all sorts, from books to movies to video games, and applying the characters within into the tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. And today, we're going to be looking at an iconic character from an iconic fantasy series in space. We're going to be having a look at the Jedi Master Luke Skywalker from Star Wars. Now I know what you're thinking. How on earth can you take a film like Star Wars and a franchise like Star Wars and put it in a fantasy game? They have futuristic tech and all that. Well, it turns out that D&D thought of that, and in the Dungeon Master's Guide, they specifically discuss taking futuristic weaponry and putting it into D&D. Now, they cover basic stuff like laser pistols, blasters, and rifles and things like that, but with just a tiny bit of tweaking, turning them into futuristic tech that the Jedi would use is not that hard. Let's have a look-see who Luke Skywalker is in D&D. Now, Luke Skywalker is a human, not hard to determine there. His alignment is neutral good. He tries to follow the rules of the Jedi, but he also has that desire to do right, and sometimes that leads him to some chaotic actions, but neutral good made the most sense. He also has the Outlander background, growing up most of his life on the farms of Tatooine out in the wilds, and he's pretty good when he's stuck in the swamps of Dagobah, and he knows what he's doing there. What kind of class would you make a Jedi warrior? Well, he needs telekinesis, obviously, and other force powers, but he's not super skilled when it comes to some of the more advanced force abilities. He's much better at just using the force to power up him in combat. So I decided to make him a Psi warrior fighter. A fighter that uses their Psi abilities, PSI abilities, in order to enhance them in combat. It made the most sense for Luke. His stats. As a strength stat, he's not super strong, but he's got more strength than the average person. I gave him a strength of 14. He's incredibly dexterous, agile, and fast, and that's his main stat. I gave him a 20 for that. I also gave him a constitution of 16. He takes quite a beating in a couple of the films, and while he isn't the best off afterwards, he certainly manages. He has an intelligence of 14, having some education from Obi-Wan and Yoda. But he's also pretty good at analyzing the battlefield and figuring out what he needs to do, as well as dealing with strategies. I gave him a 16 on his wisdom. And he does have the force to power up his charisma a little bit, plus he just gets along with folks and is generally an agreeable person. I gave him a 16 on his charisma. His saving throws are strength and constitution, being a fighter. His skills are animal handling, athletics, persuasion, and survival for proficiencies. He also has expertise in acrobatics, which he gets from one of his feats we'll talk about in a sec. His hit points, he has 165 hit points. I made him level 18 so that he would get the top level Psi Warrior ability, the Telekinetic Master. We'll go over that shortly. He has a speed of 40, once again, thanks to a feat. He wears leather armor. I decided to give him a good edge, and I gave him +3 studded leather armor. He's a light armor wielder to be sure, but with that extra +3 and another feat he's going to get, he has an armor class of 20. What about his weapons, though? Well, he does carry a laser pistol, his blaster. This is something that the DM's Guide covers automatically. It does radiant damage. It's a dexterity-based weapon because of its distance. So it has a +11 to hit when Luke wields it. And it does 3d6 +5 radiant damage when it hits. But what about his lightsaber? His classic Jedi weapon that was passed down from his father? Well, lightsabers are a little broken, because yes, they're laser swords, and I decided to make them a radiant-wielding longsword, but simply making it a +3 weapon seemed a little bit too weak for me, because these things cut through stone and steel with ease. They can basically cut through anything. So, in order to hit with someone with a lightsaber would basically spell, like, the end of them most of the time. And I wanted to reflect this, that the only way to survive a lightsaber is to be so agile that you can just dodge it. I decided that the lightsaber was going to be a +5 weapon. It also is going to have both the finesse and the versatile features. Luke usually wields his lightsaber with 2 hands, so he's able to wield it with 3d10 radiant damage dice, and a +10 on top of that. And he's able to use his dexterity to boot. This gives him an attack bonus of +16. Very, very hard to miss with that laser sword. He speaks Common, as well as Celestial and Infernal. I figured that he would obviously speak the language of the common folk, but as a Jedi, he would be versed in light and dark forces, so speaking Celestial and Infernal kind of adds up. He is proficient in all types of armor, as well as all types of weapons, and firearms, thanks to his blaster training. That's going to be another feat that he has. He also is proficient in land vehicles, since he does fly around his speeder, and he's a skilled pilot, although there aren't any flying vehicles in D&D, so there was no proficiency for that. And then there's his features. His fighting style, as a fighter, he's skilled in great weapon fighting, since he wields his lightsaber with 2 hands. That's something he'd do often. He has the second wind power, as well as 2 action surges. And then as a Psi Warrior, he has the psionic power ability. This is where he gets to use psionic energy dice to give him a protective field, a psionic strike, as well as telekinetic movement, allowing him to hit harder, block attacks, and move around the battlefield with telekinesis. He gets extra attack, and at this level, he actually would get 3 attacks per attack action. He also has the telekinetic adept power, where he can use his psionic energy dice to use psi-powered leaps, as well as telekinetic thrusts, pushing around the battlefield and jumping, which we see him do in the movies. He has a triple use of the Indomitable feat, letting him resist saving throws better. He has the Guarded Mind, the Bulwark of Force, and the Telekinetic Master powers, all the capstone stuff from the Psi Warrior, really buffing up his psionic energy dice and his ability to resist damage using this telekinetic power. So lots of good stuff there. And then there's his other feats. Telekinetic and telepathic, which makes sense considering his force powers. The Prodigy feat, which is how he got his expertise in acrobatics. He also has the Defensive Duelist feat. This means that he's able to use his reaction to up his AC by his proficiency bonus using his lightsaber, putting his armor class at an impressive 26. This is how, in my mind, Jedi would use their lightsabers to block things, using Defensive Duelist. He also has the Inspiring Leader feat, since he is, a commander of the rebel forces. The Mobile feat, which gave him his extra mobility, and the Gunner feat, which allowed him to use his blaster. Luke Skywalker is, we're going with a younger version of Luke, not the older version. He's 21 years old, 5'10", about 155 pounds, with white skin, blonde hair, and those classic blue eyes. Now, the Force is not magic. I did not give Luke spells, because he doesn't use the Force in that way. So I figured that all this extra psi-powered abilities from his subclass was pretty much the extent of his Force powers. I know later on in his career, he does manage to learn how to use the astral projection power and things like that, but I decided against that, and just to go with the Luke Skywalker at the end of episode 6. So this is Luke before his fall, if you will. And I think he's an absolute powerhouse. This is the kind of character that would be amazing on the front lines, using his lightsaber to deadly effect, attacking enemies several times, powering himself up with psionic powers, and using his telekinesis to great effect on the battlefield. This is a character who I could easily see being a deus ex machina of sorts, being a superhuman who comes in and just dominates when the heroes are having a hard time. Luke Skywalker is a badass, and no one's going to convince me otherwise. This has been the Relaxed Fantasy Review. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe down below, and keep your eyes out for more character creation coming soon. Have a good one, my friends.